Welcome to the Professional Dog Trainers Australia podcast, Dog Training Matters. Dive into effective training and behaviour modification techniques, share expert insights, debate hot topics, and discuss how to build strong, positive relationships with our canine companions. Whether you're a seasoned trainer or just starting out, join us as we champion methods that respect both dogs and their human partners. Let's embark on this journey together to elevate the world of dog training, because dog training matters.
Welcome to Training Matters podcast, a podcast for trainers, behaviourists and professionals shaping the future of working dogs in Australia. We're your hosts, Boyd Hooper and Linda Vickers, and today's conversation is all about insight, the kind that comes from lived experience and professional expertise. This is episode 2 of our Assistance and Service Dogs series, Dual Lens, Training Assistance Dogs While Living with Disability. First, it's important to acknowledge that the requirements for a support dog, whether that's an assistance or service dog, a therapy dog, or an emotional support dog, vary considerably based on the functions they're required to perform. Adding to this complexity, the terminology used to describe these dogs is often used interchangeably across all sectors involved, from government and medical practitioners to trainers and the owners themselves. Our guest today is a dog trainer specialising in assistance dog training who also lives with a disability and has her own assistance dog. She is studying a Certificate 4 in Animal Behaviour and Training with Assistance Dog Specialisation. That means she understands the technical nuances of task training, public access conditioning and welfare management, all while navigating the NDIS, anti-discrimination laws and community access themselves. Addy de Jong, welcome to the podcast. We're thrilled to have you with us.
Thanks, guys.
Let's start with your background. Did your journey begin as a handler or as a trainer? What kind of disability do you live with? And how did that shape your decision to pursue professional dog training?
Okay, so starting off with a big question. Firstly, I'll start with my disabilities. So I have autism and ADHD. I'm also a below-knee amputee and live with functional neurological disorder and dystonia. And I have a couple of other conditions like POTS and fibromyalgia as well. So it's quite a list of...
Yeah. When did you lose your leg, Addy?
So I have had a problem with my leg for about 6 years now. And it looked like a clubfoot malformation. And I kept walking on it until it frequently fractured. And last year, when I was actually working with the dog, I was just about to go into a lesson with a client, and I stood up from the desk and I fractured my foot just simply standing on my foot. And they said it was beyond repair now. So the advice was to have it amputated. So I actually went overseas to Abu Dhabi to have an amputation done, a specialised amputation, so that I could get back up and running as quickly as I possibly could. So that happened September last year.
Right. And just following up on Linda's thing, so where did the dog come into the journey along the line? Did you have a dog before that occurred, and what sort of brought you into the dog side of things?
So being autistic, as a lot of autistic people would know, we generally have a hyperfixation or something that we really love, and that's how we can navigate the world through. And mine has always been dogs, dog training, and it grew into behaviour. So whilst kids my age in primary school and high school are off playing sports or going shopping with friends or doing whatever, I was at dog clubs or dog obedience or dog shows, always hanging around with dogs. So I always had that connection with dogs, and that's how I managed to navigate most of my life up until when things got really bad in high school. So it's always been a part of my journey, having a dog there to support me. And then when things got really bad about 6 years ago and I was in and out of hospital for the majority of 2 years, it was recommended that I have an assistance dog. So I guess how my decision to become a professional dog trainer is kind of, the whole chicken and the egg story, which came first. But as I was working through the process, I could see that there was gaps in the supports that I was trying to navigate. So you'd go see a dog trainer, they would understand about the Disability Discrimination Act, or they would understand about dog training and behaviour. They would understand parts of the journey, but not all of it. So there might be missing how to develop a task specific to what I need, and not that is a cookie cutter shape task like glucose alerting or deep pressure therapy. So there was always these little gaps that I found that wasn't in one spot. And that's where I thought, there is an opportunity here for me to be able to help people like myself have those answers in a one spot and be able to navigate the journey, which is supposed to be easier, or to make our lives easier, just a little bit less complicated.
Do you think the industry underestimates the role of cognitive load? That is when handlers are exhausted from managing access rights, training, and disability at the same time.
This is a really interesting question, and I want to start by answering this, that when you have your own assistance dog and you start training other assistance dogs or coaching people with their own assistance dogs, you realize that what you're actually doing is teaching a dog to do what you physically can't do, but you have to teach it to them in the first place. So when you're going through a training process, or you're going through and you're going out into town or trying to get into an appointment, and you're trying to manage training an assistance dog or managing access rights or managing your disability at the same time, you're really juggling 2, 3, 4 different jobs. This lessens, obviously, as the dog starts to mature and has an understanding of how to problem solve itself, how to act slightly independent from you and from your cues, and you work and learn how to work together as a team, but it never truly goes away. And when you're walking around in public situations, you also kind of have a big red flashing arrow next to you, something that says that you do have a disability, but that you don't really want it to shout out to the crowd. So not only are you dealing with trying to remember how to manage access rights or what you need to achieve in that training goal, or, even just being able to get through the task that you need to do, you're also sort of managing what other people might be thinking, as you're walking around through town. If you have a scary looking assistance dog, maybe you might have a German Shepherd, then people are going to be avoidant of you and they're going to start to walk away from you. Or, if you have autism like I do and you're trying to mask and you're trying to not be so stand out in the crowd, you're also trying to manage people's thoughts of how you look in the crowd, that you're already different because you've got an assistance dog there. So it's not really just about, those simple thoughts of access rights, training, and managing your disability yourself. You're also managing a lot more on top of that. So I think it's not so much that the industry underestimates, but maybe doesn't really understand, because you can't really understand until you have lived that or until you've experienced it with someone else.
Yeah, I guess you even explaining that makes me think, if I working with assistance dogs or training them, I guess I've never really thought about it from the perspective of all the other things that you're dealing with at the same time. So that's just my personal experience, but I'm sure there would be a lot of other trainers that would think the same thing.
Yeah, and I think even from the aspect of when you have a client who gets an assistance dog and they go, okay, this is going to be great, it's going to be the support that I need, and they go, okay, I'm going to train it myself, they don't realize that they're might be training the dog to do something that they can't do. So they have to do it at the start to start off with. And I find, that was a big thing when I first started my journey, was I didn't realize that for me to be able to teach my dog how to manage to be out in different places that I couldn't handle, he needed that exposure. So I needed to go out into those places. So it's kind of at the same time working on kind of like exposure therapy for yourself in some aspects too. So there's a lot of different nuances.
Yeah, absolutely.
My experience I'm pretty much always involved with some sort of assistance or service dog in one form or another, whether it's supplying dogs or helping people source dogs or training dogs or, you know, working with and coordinating with people in one form or another. And I do think to myself, this idea of self-training, unless you're already a dog trainer or something, just seems to me to be weird. I can't even get my head around it. I can't understand why people would want to be self-trainers because, I mean, it's a pretty difficult thing to do, to get a dog up to, especially if you need the dog to physically do things for you. It just makes sense that you get professional assistance like you would for pretty much any other technical and difficult task. But maybe that's just me.
I guess the access to those areas is few and far between, and with supports that you would have available for other medical equipment, say, for example, getting a wheelchair, or even, for example, me getting my first prosthetic leg, there was an avenue for me to get government support, government's funding to be able to get those tools. Like my prosthetic, I'm not 100% sure, but I believe it was around the $15,000 mark. And obviously I don't have that sitting in my back pocket. But to purchase a well-bred puppy and go through the process of training an assistance dog with an organization or even with a professional trainer can be in the tens of thousands of dollars. And you're talking about people that potentially can't work, or if they can work, they can only do minimal hours, or that might not even have NDIS support for their other needs. So they have to find funds for their other needs as well. So I guess owner training makes it equitable for other people who need this support to be able to gain that support. It just might not be at this moment in time. It might still be in its infancy, where we have quite a few areas where we can change and adapt and make it a bit better so that everybody succeeds.
Yeah, that's right. I mean, it's easy for me to sit here and say you should get professional help, but I do agree with you that if you have to go through the whole process, it is often in the tens of thousands. So for sure. Although most of the people that I've been involved with have got funding in one form or another, whether that was government funding or, funding support or, through a charity or something like that. But yeah, point taken for sure. All right, let's keep moving. Linda?
So, Addy, obviously you believe self-trainers and private sector trainers should be recognised equally under the law, provided, of course, that they meet behavioural, veterinary and task weight criteria.
So this is the key part of that question, right? Is provided that the dog, and not just the dog, the team meet required standards, meet required behavioural, veterinary and task-based criteria set in the legislation. Now, I do believe that there is quite a bit of opportunity for the Australian government to work on the legislation and bring this up to a higher level of standard. But when we even look at organisations who train assistance dogs or even train working dogs, doesn't even have to be an assistance dogs, they don't have 100% pass rate. I'm not going to name any organisations here, but you don't see every single organisation pick out from a litter 4 or 5 pups and all 4 or 5 pups go through and qualify as assistance dogs. So whether we're talking about organisations, private sectors or self-trained assistance dogs, they all have to meet a certain level. We all have areas of opportunity to grow in this area, whether that is self-trainers having further access to professionals, to their supports, professionals to complete not just public access assessments, but also behavioural and temperament assessments, but also get support from day one, or whether it be funding for getting assistance for people to be able to afford organisation or private sector trained dogs. There's definitely areas of opportunity here, and I think it's hard to compare one to the other because they're very, very hard differences. One should have lots of experience, they should have lots of qualifications, they should go through lots of checks to be able to make sure that they're delivering a good product. And the other one might have some of that knowledge, might have all of that knowledge, but they might not also have the ability that the private sector has. They might not have access to the same training opportunities. They might not have access to the same supports or services. They might not have access to be able to get out and do the training that they need to do. So it's very hard to compare one against the other, but all three are very necessary in the assistance dog community, I believe.
You can, I mean, of course, we're talking in a pretty binary sense here, aren't we? Like, it's either you get a professional trainer or it's self-trained. But the truth is that a lot of them are, the professional trainers have a support role and assist and help with things. And I would say probably 50% of the dogs that I'm involved with would fall in that category. They wouldn't be completely trained by a trainer as such. So it's just getting that support exactly to the point, Addy, for all the reasons that you just mentioned, because they know the rules and they know this and they know how to train things and they know, I mean, in theory, they should have expertise and they can at least help somebody who wants to do it self-trained.
And I guess even to your point, Boyd, is that, sometimes you may go through and, as many people know, if you're working with behaviour, you're working with people, you're working with dogs, nothing goes exactly to plan every single time. The dog might have an experience that you weren't expecting. Say, for example, you were out in public and the dog got attacked by another dog. It was within its socialisation period. That might then have a decreased value around other dogs. So we need to sort of work towards some remedial action around, dog reactivity or something like that. So you're not ever going to work on one straight plan as if you were going to say, okay, yes, I was a professional dog trainer once before. I know how all this works. I can do it myself, but, I might not have area of expertise in that one little nuance that I need help with and support with to make sure that the dog still meets its criteria at the end of the day.
Linda?
Yeah, absolutely agree. What risks have you seen when untrained or partially trained dogs are passed off as assistance animals, Addy?
I think my major concern from both a handler and a trainer is when I am out in public and there is health and safety risks to members of the public, but then also to potentially myself or my assistance dog. So where I'm talking from there is the biggest safety concern being, if a dog got scared and there was a behaviour that wasn't addressed in the dog and it might nip or bite or react to a person coming past and that person might get injured. Or a big thing that I've worked with, Sirius, my assistance dog, since he was a little puppy, is having high engagement on myself so that nothing around him was a big distraction, because if he does get distracted, I can't necessarily say in exactly 5 minutes, I'm going to have a seizure. He's got to be able to, whether he's on duty, off duty, he's in a crowd, he's not in a crowd, he's wherever he might be, he needs to be able to focus back on me. So even if, he's in a crowd where people are trying to get his attention, he's still going to have that engagement on me so he can still perform his tasks. A lot of times we think about these things in little bits of portions, but we don't think about them in the whole picture. So when we're talking about untrained or partially trained dogs, they might be meeting some standards and the owner or the handler might be already expecting to count on that dog and their training's not right up to spot. And when they need them at most, their life is essentially at risk because their dog isn't able to do the job. So there's, in my opinion, there's 3 high risks of untrained or partially trained assistance dogs doing that role. And the risks are always going to be public health and safety on the dog, and health and safety of the handler as well.
Yep. I'll even value add on top of that a couple of other things. So firstly, and we sort of touched on this earlier in one of Linda's questions, with relation to hygiene as being part of the problem. So if the dog is pissing and shitting in places and or just then that just really upsets people. And if the dogs are not behaving appropriately because they're not untrained or partially trained, and whether that not behaving appropriately is the owner is losing control or the dog is behaving inappropriately, whatever that is, whether it could be a low level aggression or just a reactivity or, anything you can sort of imagine that would be inappropriate for a dog that you're taking into shopping centres and movie theatres and everything like that. There's a certain etiquette, I guess, on the way that we would expect an assistance dog to behave in that circumstance, and pissing and shitting is also part of that. Then what that's doing is hurting the entire industry because it's giving it a bad name, and then people don't want it and they limit it and then they push back on it. I think so from a society point of view, what I think one of the risks of untrained or partially trained dogs is that they create a bad image for these dogs, and that just makes it harder for everybody going forward.
I guess to add point to that as well, we live in a multicultural society. So a lot of people that are now in Australia have grown up with dogs and have been taught the opposite of what maybe most Australians have been taught. Like my auntie's from the Philippines, and she's been taught since a little young girl, you don't go near dogs. Dogs carry diseases. They can hurt you because most of the dogs in the Philippines aren't domesticated dogs. They're not dogs that are people's pets. They're not living in homes. So they actually can cause huge issues. So when, my auntie came over to Australia, she was quite scared of dogs. So when you're walking around with an assistance dog in a place where people choose to be that they don't expect a dog to be, and you're not quite aware of, or you're not respectful of the fact that they might be genuinely scared, they might be genuinely allergic to dogs, they might be very opposed to having dogs in that area, and you're not meeting that with respect by having a well-trained dog, by having a dog that's, for example, loose leash walking next to you, avoiding being a part of anybody else's situation or conversation. To your point as well, Boyd, not peeing and pooping everywhere. These things have to be made aware of, because yes, it is, as an assistance dog handler, it is our legal right to have access to these issues, but it's also our legal responsibility to ensure that our dog is not negatively impacting other people's lives.
Yeah. As long as we're talking genuinely negatively impacting, which I know you and I are here, Addy, right? I'm agreeing. But to your point, there are some people culturally who are just afraid of dogs and have really strong biases. And I perceive that, well, to a large degree, that's pretty much their problem, okay? They're living in Australia. In here, we have guide dogs, we have assistance dogs, we have service dogs of all sorts of applications, and we have people, we're a dog sort of culture broadly. So, if you're terrified of dogs and, you've got a problem with a dog being in a shopping centre when you're in there, well, no offence really, but that's your problem,
Yeah, and I guess that's a point as well. Like, I've been in a situation where I've been in an elevator to go up to a next floor, and a person said, oh, no, I can't come in. I've gone, oh, no, he's fine. He won't do anything. Oh, no, I'm just genuinely scared. Okay,
yeah, but
no worries.
But Addy, here's the point.
That's it,
I know two people who can't get in an elevator even without a dog. They're terrified of elevators, okay?
Yeah.
Well, that's their problem, right? It's like we're not going to not put elevators in buildings because people are afraid of getting in elevators, okay? So, we can't, I think, dogs are part of our life and part of our community, and we shouldn't have to super compensate for them. So as long as they're behaving in the following sort of social norms and appropriate behaviours in the real world, then, which is our point exactly. I just wanted to push back. I'm sort of playing the devil's advocate there in that.
That's okay. It's a respectful situation, right? Like, you're not going to then force a person who doesn't want to go into an elevator to go into an elevator. You're going to go, okay, well, there's stairs around the corner there. You can have a choice to go around the corner. Same for this situation where you go, okay, well, I'm still going to take the elevator with my assistance dog because I can't physically use crutches to go upstairs, but you can wait for the next one if you would like. Yeah. So there is that situation where, as long as I'm being respectful, my dog Sirius isn't going to rush up to that person, isn't going to give that person any attention. Quite frankly, he probably didn't even realize they were there or care. But as long as I am providing that respect where I go, you know what, I'm not going to then disadvantage myself because I physically can't walk up the stairs with crutches in that situation.
Yeah, but
I'm also going to then
even
my
if
dog's
you
trained.
could, Addy, even if you could do it, right? I don't feel that you should be obliged because it's not your problem. It's their problem, okay? And we shouldn't be having to cope with, okay, let's say I walk into an elevator and a woman says to me, I can't get in the elevator with you because I'm afraid of men, okay? Or, men that look like you or something. Well, I would say, well, I'm sorry, madam, that's your problem. I'm not going to not get in the elevator because you have this problem. If you choose not to get in the elevator, that's up to you. But, you've got to your own personal problems. You have to address that. I'm not compensating for that. And I'll give you an example. I was doing sort of handover training with an assistance dog not that long ago, and we were going up to a sort of a external cafe booth type thing to just order food, and I was with the client and me and the client and the dog, and it was just a matter of walking up to the cafe counter there, if you like, and ordering something, and the dog was just there, and then being able to get it and carry it over to a table in the outside area there, and then just sitting down. Okay, so just imagine sort of an outdoor cafe type thing. Okay, and when we walked up to the counter, there was a woman who was there standing already before us, and then she looks down, she sees the dog and starts being reactive and going, oh no, I'm afraid of dogs, take him away. And I said, no, I'm sorry, I won't take him away. He's entitled to be here, he's allowed to be here. I'm telling you that he's safe. If you feel uncomfortable, you're welcome to leave, but it's not my responsibility to take the dog away because you have your personal problems, any more than it would be my responsibility if you were afraid of men, or my responsibility if you were afraid of umbrellas or anything else. You know what I mean? If people have these social problems, then I don't think we have to sort of super compensate. But anyway, we're sort of going off on a tangent.
So
Let's keep it.
I guess just to the last point of this is I guess the other aspect of this isn't just partially or untrained assistance dogs, right? A society gets their ideas and values of all dogs. They don't just discriminate assistance dogs with Joe Blow walking his dog down the street. So if a person has a negative interaction with a dog walking down the street, or a negative off-leash interaction with the dog, or, we've got all these situations that have come up in the media lately with people having dog bites and situations with reactive dogs, that's also creating issues for trained and untrained and partially trained and any dog in the industry as well. So we sort of kind of need to keep all of these ideas in play when we're working through these situations, because it's not just as simple as going, he is safe. People also have their right to be in that public space too. So there's lots of different aspects of it.
I'm not stopping them from going into that public place. I reiterate the point. If the person had a problem with men, okay, I'm not saying they can't come in the elevator, or they can't come in the same shop, or they can't be in the same room as me. They can. If they are uncomfortable with it, well, then that's up to them. But it's not my obligation that if they're afraid of men, that I should have to leave or I don't get in the elevator. It's their issue and they have to address it, is the point. Remember, I'm playing the devil's advocate here, okay? We all want to be reasonable and socially acceptable, okay? But where I differ from you is that you said, I couldn't take the stairs because of my disability, so I needed to take the elevator, so they have to sort of suck it up. I agree with that completely, but I go one step further. Even if you could have taken the stairs, you should not be obliged, because it is their issue and it is not a normal issue. And I don't believe that we should be having to compensate for people with assistance and service dogs. They should be able to go places. There are places, as you know, if you've got a guide dog for the blind, there'll be restaurant owners and there'll be various other people who'll say they don't want the dog in there. Bad luck. It could be the restaurant owner doesn't want the guide dog to come into the restaurant. Bad luck. They can't do anything about it. It's against the law to refuse the entry. There might be people in the shop, as you said, from a cultural point of view, may think the dog is dirty and they may be uncomfortable with the dog being in the restaurant while they're there. Bad luck. That's their problem, not yours. or it might be somebody's afraid of dogs because they've been attacked. Again, that's their problem, not yours. Okay, if you've got that guide dog, you go in that restaurant and you get your full rights. And if somebody doesn't like it, is uncomfortable with it, whatever, that's their problem. They have to deal with it. Anyway, we really need to keep moving. So, Linda, can we?
Yes. Okay. So I guess just now thinking about the dog, Addy. So from your personal experience, what are the most overlooked welfare risks for assistance dogs, especially in full-time work?
I genuinely believe that people who have assistance dogs value their assistance dogs, value the dog themselves. And I genuinely believe that they create a position that is suitable, with suitable supports for them and the dogs. So if there are any welfare risks, it's either they're not aware of them as a start, or they're working through them. So when we're talking about welfare risks, essentially for assistance dogs, I would be looking at the same welfare risks as a normal dog. You know, making sure that they have the appropriate nutrition is a big one. So I have a Labrador, and when I take my Labrador out and about as an assistance dog, I constantly get, oh, he's too skinny to be a Labrador. Unfortunately, our societal norms for breeds like Labradors is they're quite chunky. You know, having that.
You mean fat? You mean
yes,
fat.
I do. I genuinely mean fat. And, you know, that puts lots of pressure on their joints. It puts pressure on their health and their well-being, on their cardiovascular system, all the things that, you know, we should be aware of. But that's a societal norm. And even potentially some breeders have that thought process as well, you know, or you go to the vet and the vet says, this is how the dog looks. That's what I mean by genuinely people are trying to do the right thing by their assistance dog because they add so much value to their life. They just don't maybe have the right knowledge or the right supports to actually understand, you know, what is beneficial for their health and what is not. So I think that is the biggest welfare risk in itself, is not the lack of understanding, but the lack of understanding at the same time, if that makes sense.
It does, and I agree with you. I think you covered that pretty well. I think that virtually everyone who has an assistance dog, their dogs have a good life. They get lots of attention, lots of affection, lots of meaningful stimulation. They go places, they do things. I think it's, on average, I think it's a great life. And if there is a welfare issue, as you pointed out, Addy, it's more based on ignorance. They just didn't realise that was inappropriate. Like they're getting cans of dog food, all they're feeding them is canned dog food or something like that. You know, but that's pretty easily fixed. But again, this comes back, Linda, to your earlier question, doesn't it? You know, between self-trainers and the private sector. If you had a professional trainer, they should be able to sort of give those guidelines on nutrition, on downtime, on exercise, on the ability to, you know, explore and investigate and be a dog, you know, in the true sense of the word, so to speak, some of the time.
Absolutely. I would say probably in some of the sectors to do with maybe therapy dogs going into schools, I think a lot of the time they're expected to be there from, well, usually they're early 8 to 5 or 6 at night. I often wonder whether they should get like, you know, a care day off or have a Wednesday off or something, because I think 5 days of full-time work in a school can be a bit much sometimes. So
it depends on the dog, right, though? If the dog is brought up and bred for that work, then, you know, they genuinely enjoy it, but you have to be able to see the signs of stress in the dog. And if there are signs of stress in the dog or signs of ill management of well-being, then yes, they do have to change something about that. But that's any sort of situation. That's any situation, whether or not it's at a school with kids who might have a meltdown and might not be able to control their emotions, and the dog has to be physically removed from the area and crated so that they're safe. Or, you know, there's all of these little nuances that we have to think about. But in saying that, though, if, say, for example, my female Labrador, if she was in that situation, she would be begging to go to work 6 or 7 days a week because she loves those interactions. She genuinely gets energized and feels good from those situations. But you can't do that 24/7 either. So you have to be able to manage that between, you know, where is the dog sitting and how are they managing the situation, and are they handling it well? Are they benefiting from the situation? And if not, something does need to change. I agree with you, Linda.
I think it probably also has to do with selecting the right breed or for the job. I guess, sometimes Labradors, having a couple myself, kids, people, just it's everything they want. A lot of the times I'll see therapy dogs that are cross, so there might be a poodle cross lab, and sometimes they're not as people orientated or as kid orientated as a full lab might be. So I think we talk about it a little bit further on, where we talk about selecting the right breed as well for the job.
Yeah.
So we talk a lot about dog suitability on this podcast and as trainers and stuff. So how do you assess handler readiness and capacity for both training and long-term maintenance, looking at it from the dog and the dog-handler relationship?
So I guess there's two parts to this. We have to think about the dog welfare and how that is going to be maintained moving forward. But we also need to understand that the handler themselves needs more supports in place than just an assistance dog. So when I'm looking at working with a client, I really want to understand their whole picture. What supports do they have in play? How do they interact their daily lives? What are they expecting from this situation? How do they think the training is going to go moving forward? If something does go unplanned, what supports do they have in the background that they can assist them moving forward? And I think that one is a big one for even me personally. So when I got my assistance dog Sirius, before I got Sirius, I was in contact with my medical team, and they helped me decide whether or not I was ready to have the journey again for Sirius. So there needs to be a lot of background checking in regards to, is the situation set up right? Are there supports in place? Does the handler have the abilities that they need to have? And if they don't, how do we then support them to have that? Because we can't just say, no, you can't have an assistance dog, but how do we then make that picture right for both the dog and the handler?
Yeah, I mean, if they've got a carer, if they're a child, for example, or if they've got a carer, then we get around it like that. But yeah, if you're talking about sort of somebody who doesn't have somebody there in direct support, like family member or something, then yeah, that can be a real problem, can't it? When you've got somebody that you just sort of feel like doesn't have the emotional maturity to be able to care for the dog appropriately and be reasonable with the dog, and there's nobody else there to sort of oversee it. So,
well, it's not even that, I guess, when you're thinking about, if I use a personal example from myself, when I was training my German Shepherd before Sirius Remedy, and I hadn't been diagnosed with autism at this stage, there would be times where she had lots of energy, she had lots of drive, I was still learning about things, and we'd be walking down the street and I'd be going, okay, I've done loose leash walking practice a million times, we've done it with so many distractions, but something's just not clicking. And I would have a full meltdown in that situation. And I needed to make sure that if I have a meltdown and she's not my assistance dog, she's not trained to support me in that, I still need to be able to have the right frame of mind to be able to make sure that she's safe, that she's still on a lead, that she's away from anything that could hurt her, that, she's not going to go off and cause any issues in the process. All these little things that we have to sort of think about even when we're dealing with our own disabilities in that situation. So it's more than just different levels of capacity. It's all how things fit into that one picture.
Sure.
Big picture.
Yeah. Good, Linda.
Picture.
I agree. It's a big picture. You've got to look at the big picture, the overarching, don't you? Yeah, for sure.
And then you've also got to look at, as trainers, I guess, just being a trainer and having a trainer hat on, how much of, we're working with the dog and getting it to do tasks or, making sure it's toilet trained, all those types of things. How much of that, or that's our responsibility, then, as you say, Addy, where's the gap of the other person who's making sure all of those other aspects are filled in to ensure the dog should be with the handler, for example, or go into that situation?
Yeah, there's different parties in this picture. Normally, if we're thinking about just a dog trainer working with a abled client, you've got three parts to the picture, right? You've got the dog trainer, the dog, and the handler. Three parts that have responsibilities all to bring. Now, if one of those parts can't necessarily always bring that responsibility. Someone has to pick that responsibility up, whether that is a support carer, a friend or a family member, or someone else has to pick up that piece as well. So, does the trainer then have to pick up that piece? And is it actually feasible? So there's lots of things that you have to think about, and not every picture is the same. So when I'm working with, say, for example, I'm working with 2 different clients who both have autism, their pictures don't look exactly the same. So we have to then change that and fully understand where they're at, where their life is, what their picture looks like, so that we can make sure everything fits into that the way it needs to, and not just have a standard, this is how it has to work and you have to fit into that picture.
Yeah.
So, all right, what's your approach and thoughts on tool use, dog equipment use from an ethical sort of standards point of view? Have you got any strong opinions either way on particular devices, head collars, check chains, prong collars, e-collars, physical guidance versus luring, free shaping, just protocols and tools? Where do you stand with that as far as for dogs for public access training and for assistance and service dogs more generally?
So this is a big question in
I'll interject
topic.
there. I thought it was a massive question. I felt like we could do the whole podcast on that. So give us a short answer, and we'll get back in the future and we'll address it. So give us your quick answer, because I do agree to do that justice is about 20 or 30 minutes. So I agree.
So the quick answer to that is, look, all tools can be used inappropriately and unethically. And I believe tools have a really important place in understanding how to get from point A to point B. They're part of the picture that helps provide feedback, consequences to the dog. And how this then interacts with the assistance dog community is, lots of people can't use certain tools. Say, for example, a very good example for you, prong collar. If I had to use a prong collar on my dog Sirius, which I don't, but if I did, and I was walking with 2 crutches and I had to give him a small adversive tap on the prong collar, I wouldn't be able to do that whilst also having both hands on my crutches. So then it becomes a safety risk to myself. So then does that then turn to, would an e-collar be better with a finger button? Well, in that situation, it might be. It really depends on the dog, the handler, the training, and the situation moving forward.
Yeah,
but
I think that's pretty much what the PDTA promotes, isn't it, across the board, not just for assistance. I mean, I don't think Linda or I could have put it better if we were talking about dogs for any purpose, not just assistance dogs. So
Correct. Yep, 100%.
Anything else you wanted to add to that, or should we move on?
No, I think that's pretty.
Yeah. No, I thought
it was a short answer.
Excellent short answer.
It was a difficult question. It's particularly difficult to answer in short, and I think you did a great job in the way you answered that. Okay,
awesome.
Because I thought that was going to be the hairy question of the interview, and turned out that you just managed it perfectly. Okay, so how can trainers better support clients with disabilities, particularly in terms of sort of language and access needs and collaboration and stuff like that? In other words, suggestions for improvement. What could we be doing better? How could we make things, how could we improve things?
Look, this is a question I ask myself personally all the time. And I think this comes back to your original first question in regards to why I decided to become a dog trainer. There is a gap in the industry where, we understand the dog training aspect, or we understand the coaching aspect, or we understand, what has been done in the past in regards to tasks, but we don't necessarily have all of the pieces to move forward. So for me personally, what I'm doing for professional development is I'm actually going through doing my psych degree, and I will be transferring that to a occupational therapy degree as well, so that I can understand how I can shape tasks better, understand how I can communicate with people better. So I think, from my experiences working for a suicide hotline, I was able to understand how to communicate, how to have conversations with people to get that really important in-depth information without sounding intrusive or abrupt, or without, separating coach from handler. And these are all aspects that we think as dog trainers that it's just about training the dog for the job that it needs to be. but we're not always there with the person. They need to be able to understand, they need to be able to be motivated, they need to be able to be educated, and they need to understand how this process works so that they can successfully take it on from their side of things. So if there was anything that I could say that we could do better is being open to professional development and growth. It's about understanding what else we can learn to make the situation easier and better.
Great. Sort of on a somewhat related question now, misconceptions in the professional training community that you think need correcting. Let's keep it consistent with a sort of assistance and service dogs. But I'll make the question an open question. Misconceptions generally, whether they're public misconceptions, government agency misconceptions as far as that, or client misconceptions. And again, I acknowledge we could spend 15, 20 minutes on this question alone. So give us your short answer and we've already invited you back for a follow-up so we can deal with those ones in the future.
There is a long list of misconceptions, not only in the industry, but also in the assistance dog community. If I could grab out a list, I would literally need to get a toilet paper roll and start writing them all in the toilet paper roll.
Give us your top two.
Top two, look, you get everything. You get everything all the way around. Misconceptions of assistance dogs shouldn't be in society and that they're not at all helpful, supportive to their handler, and that they're actually a liability rather than an asset is probably the biggest one.
Wow, that's one I wouldn't have thought of, to be honest.
Yes, it's one that you would never think that pops up, but it pops up quite frequently and very often.
Just trying to think what other ones there will be when we're thinking of all aspects of it. I guess, given there's no Australia-wide regulation in terms of what makes an assistance dog, what training is required, apart from what falls under the Disability Act, I think it does make it really difficult. I think education is probably a big thing that needs to be brought forward within the industry in terms of assistance dogs, educating the general public.
Yes, 100%. I think that is definitely something that needs to be part of the legislation is, how do we educate all people, all areas of public about assistance dogs and what they can actually do and how they can benefit.
And what they can't do, unrealistic expectations. Yes. I mean, yes. Look how badly behaved some little kids are. If a dog was even half that badly behaved, people would be up in arms, okay? And yet we expect a dog to be better behaved than a human, with a massive brain. So, yeah, I think my biggest one when I'm asked questions about misconceptions is that people just have unrealistic expectations about the dog to the point where they expect it to be better behaved than a human, which is ridiculous.
Even unrealistic expectations around what the dog can task, how they can support a person with their disability. What aspects can they actually do to support you? They can't get in your car and drive you from point A to point B. There's these high levels of situations where we can use other tools that are probably better managed for those situations and have the dog do something more suitable to support the handler than what the handler may think is best for them.
Yeah.
Yeah, agreed.
Okay, moving on. So when a client attends with a candidate dog for assistance or service, what are your must-haves in terms of temperament drives and thresholds and the like? And are these based on function or functions they're being trained for? And so, don't try and go for everything, but let's just pick one or two examples of a role, the roles and tasks of a specific application. In fact, let me guide you on one. Somebody who had such a disability that they needed the dog to be able to do some physical tasks like pick an object up off the ground and potentially, help them over an obstacle, for example, or in certain circumstances, potentially open a door for them. So we're not just talking about a dog being there, we're talking about it actually doing functions that they need. And so what are your sort of must-haves and what are your criteria and you want? We're assuming here that they've come to you with a dog and they want you to look at it. But you can manipulate the question and say, well, if I was getting a dog for a client, this is what I would be looking for. So whichever way you want to go about it.
Yeah, sure. So firstly, I do want to clarify that an assistance dog, or if you're overseas, a service dog, is defined as being able to task and do a task to support a person's symptoms of their disability. So if the dog isn't just there. If we're talking about a dog that is used for mobility, so similar to what you were referring to, Boyd, we have to think about other things than just temperament, drives, and thresholds. We also need to think about, what that animal can physically do. So we're not going to get a toy poodle to be able to help a person navigate or be doing guide work for a full-grown adult. We need to think about the physical capabilities of the dog as well to what the tasks are. The other aspect of that is too that when we're talking about talking to a candidate, their condition can potentially change from when we first meet them to when we later on down the track work with them. So we've got to be able to think about what the dog can do in the future, what the dog can't do in the future, and then what is the plan moving forward for that. So if I'm looking at a dog that needs to be able to, say, for example, Sirius does retrievals. He can also do guide work. He can also open doors. So all three of those options that you just talked about, I want to make sure that he has a good level of drive. So he has a good level of motivation to want to do that work. I'm not trying to bribe him. I'm not trying to motivate him in any way. He genuinely goes, I know how to do this and I really want to do this, right? So then that gives him an area of opportunity to be able to do this for longer extended periods of time. If I'm talking about temperament, I want a dog that is happy to work in all sorts of environments, is environmentally sound, has good values around people, other dogs, other animals, and has the cognitive ability to be able to learn and grow and develop as well. There's a whole heap of different aspects that we need to look at that changes with different types of assistance dogs. So if I'm looking for a diabetic alert dog, I want to have a dog that's going to be able to pick up odor really well and be motivated for odor. If I want to have a dog that is quite happy to support someone with a autistic meltdown, they might be lower threshold to someone who has a meltdown. They might be more inclined to sit on someone's lap and be able to sit there for quite a long period of time. And then who I'm looking for as well plays into account. So, my type of assistance dog, he is very drivey. He does lots of sports work outside of assistance dog stuff. He would definitely not suit majority of assistance dog homes. So there's lots of different aspects that we need to think about when we're talking about the type of dog that's going to fit a certain handler in a certain situation.
So, Addy, do you use a standardised sort of task library for your clients of the way you train and the way and the skill sets, or is everything tailored from the ground up based on the functional capacity and the specific requirements?
Task-wise, so we're not talking about general behaviour and life skills.
No.
Task-wise is definitely built from the ground up for our clients. We work with a number of clients and a number of disabilities and a number of different situations. And I believe that to do the task justice, you really need to have a look at those parts individually. And this is a reason why I particularly want to study occupational therapy as well, because it gives an understanding of that background of how we can further support handlers. Because not all the time does a handler come in and go, this is my disability. These are the things I find hard in daily life that I need support with. There's a lot of times that you need to dig down and ask and find those questions of how the dog can better support the client. So definitely no, we don't have a standardised task library.
Living with disability and training for others gives you an unusual level of insight. How has that influenced the way you teach generalisation, stimulus control or stress recovery in dogs?
Another massive question there for you.
Yep.
How long have you got?
I was going to say again, this is another big one, right?
It is.
I think to answer your question in a short way, it's very easy for us to go, this is how we train all dogs. This is a program that works well for all of our dogs. at all of our situations. But then as trainers, you would know that when you put in another being on top of that, there is another layer of complications, so to speak. You have to impact how that person is then going to be able to carry out that program, how that person is then going to be able to carry out that training. And when that then transfers to the training of, stress recovery in dogs, or how that then transfers into generalizing behaviors, that creates a big situation in itself. By that, I mean, if I'm wanting to make sure that a dog is able to do a set task in multiple different environments, under multiple different distractions, and be able to do this consistently every time, then that person would have to be able to keep that training going, keep the level of reinforcement up, have access to those areas. And sometimes, those people aren't going to be able to do that because that is where their disability impacts them. So we need to be able to understand these different levels of complications that we need to then think outside of the box to still get the same result, but maybe employing extra support. This might be where you get a professional trainer to come in, or you might have a support worker.
Couldn't agree more. Took the words right out of my mouth. Exactly. I'll be honest, I have no idea how you could reliably generalise, that level of obedience and the complex behaviours that you need of an assistance dog without having a third party there, particularly if the person has some disabilities. But so you're loading up, they've got disabilities and they're not a professional trainer, and the dog doesn't know the rules in that environment. And you went with all of those dynamics in place. It seems to me almost incomprehensible how you could expect it to be there. You need to go there. I know in certain circumstances we have, to really generalise and prove things when we've needed it, we've needed 2 trainers there on top of the person, to be able to set up scenarios to generalise it to real world environments, So to do it by yourself just seems to me, well, to be honest, incomprehensible to get any sort of level of reliability.
And then you've got general public on top of that, right? And if you've got someone with a disability that feels uncomfortable in general public, then that's going to make them even worse. Or if you've got Joe Blow coming down the road going, oh my goodness, that's a beautiful dog, can I come say hello? And they don't necessarily understand what an assistance dog is and how they need to interact around assistance dogs, then that's an added level on top of that as well.
That's right. Yeah. Incredibly complex.
And in what ways have you adapted or adjusted your training protocols based on something that worked or something that failed with your own dog, or even feedback from clients?
And Addy, I'm just going to let you know, this will be the last question, so go for it.
Go for it. Take it away. So I guess the thing that I've learned throughout my journey is that we're always adapting and we're always adjusting as we go along. We may have a standard training program. For example, we have a standard training program for life skills. And this is how we, have controlled exposure around different aspects. But we always have to make a slight adjustment to this if the person has a disability, because they may not be able to function the way we function. So the biggest thing that I've learned is not to always have that cookie cutter cutout program, but to be able to think outside of the box, to be able to support the person to get the same result. It's almost like you're thinking about a journey. You're going from point A to point B, and this is how it normally works with the 6 steps in between. Whereas we might have to go, all right, we're going from point A to point B, so we're starting at the same point, we're ending with the same result, but we might have to do 8 or 9 steps in between because the person needs that 2 or 3 steps broken down into smaller spots, or they need extra support around this area, or they might need the trainer to do this section of the program, or, all these little things that pop up. It's just those little things that we need to be aware of that supports the owner and the handler themselves moving forward with their assistance dog being successful in the journey that they're hoping to have.
Great.
Thanks so much for coming on, Addy. Your insights are so valuable, not just in how we train dogs, but for how we train ourselves to understand lived experiences, legislation, and the ethics of this work. And we'll definitely be having you back on when we talk about some more aspects of assistance and support dogs.
Even potentially twice more, because we've been talking about getting a bit of a round table where we could follow up some of those questions as well. Addy, if people want to get in touch with you, connect with you, want your services, anything like that, what's the best way they can get in contact with you or find out about any information that you can provide?
Yeah, awesome. So they can jump on to the Canine Pro, the Canine Professionals website, or contact the office on 02 45 789 789.
Do you know what the website address is off the top of your head?
Caninepro.com.au.
Beautiful. Canine. And that's capital K number 9, yeah?
Correct.
Yep. Canine Pro. All one word, or is there a dot?
Yep, all one word.
Canine Pro. So capital K or K, numeral 9, pro.
.com.au.
Beautiful. Great.
Great. Thank you very much. This has been Assistance and Service Dogs, episode 2.
Great. Thanks, guys. See you at the next one.
Thank you, everyone.